It all started because of a bulb. A cold February morning. The year is 1637. The place is Haarlem, in the Netherlands. A wealthy merchant named Adriaan van Bergen sat trembling before a notary. But this trembling had nothing to do with the cold. It came from fear and regret. He had just signed over his house, his barn, and the 4 horses inside it all for a single piece of paper. That paper represented ownership of a tulip bulb that hadn't even been dug out of the ground yet. Semper Augustus, forever majestic. Adriaan was certain he would sell this bulb for 3 times the price within a few weeks. Everyone thought the same. Everyone was getting rich. In coffee houses, in town squares, outside church doors, tulips were the only topic of conversation, and Adriaan wanted in on this train. But had he arrived too late? What he didn't know was that in exactly 3 weeks, that piece of paper would be worth less than the wrapping paper around a bag of onions, and he would lose his house. This is the story of the first great economic bubble in recorded history, one of the most absurd financial manias humanity has ever witnessed. The story of days when fortunes were built and destroyed overnight over a flower. Welcome to Tulip Mania. Our story doesn't actually begin in the Netherlands. It begins thousands of kilometers to the east, in the lands of the Ottoman Empire. In the middle of the 16th century, the tulip was the most beloved flower in the Ottoman palace gardens. Sultans wrote poems about tulips. Architects carved tulip motifs into mosques and palaces. Even the word tulip, written in Arabic script, shared the same letters as the word Allah. In the East, this flower was not merely a plant. It was a symbol, a passion. In 1554, the ambassador Ogier Guillain de Busbecq, sent by Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand to the Ottoman court, was captivated by the magnificent flowers he encountered in Istanbul. Every time he visited the palace, he gazed in wonder at the colorful tulips blooming in the gardens. And when he returned home, he made sure not to leave without taking tulip bulbs with him. That was how Europe met the tulip. Busbecq planted the bulbs in the imperial gardens of Vienna. From there, the tulip slowly became the darling of European aristocracy. At first, it was a luxury accessible only to kings, princes, and wealthy nobles. But the real story began when the tulip reached the Netherlands. In the early 17th century, the Netherlands was one of the wealthiest places on earth. During what became known as the Dutch Golden Age, Amsterdam was the heart of global trade. Dutch merchants brought spices from Indonesia, gold from Africa, and precious metals from the Americas. Banking, insurance, the stock exchange, the foundations of modern capitalism were being laid right here. And with this wealth came something else: the desire to display status. Wealthy merchants were looking for ways to show off their success, and this is precisely where the tulip entered the picture. The tulip was the perfect status symbol. Rare, exotic, beautiful, difficult to cultivate, and most importantly, extraordinarily expensive. When Carolus Clusius, a botanist at the University of Leiden, brought tulip bulbs to the Netherlands in 1593, the rise of the tulip in Holland began. Clusius refused to sell his bulbs. They were for scientific research. But one night, thieves broke into his garden and stole every last one. Ironically, that theft gave birth to the Dutch tulip trade. Now I need to tell you about a paradox. The thing that truly ignited tulip mania was, in fact, a disease. Most tulips bloom in a single solid color, but occasionally, very rarely, flames and streaks of color appear on the petals. Red flames on a white background, purple veins on yellow. These broken flowers were extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily valuable. Nobody knew it at the time, but the cause of these unique patterns was a virus, the tulip-breaking virus. Carried by aphids, this virus disrupted the pigmentation of the tulip, creating those mesmerizing patterns. Diseased tulips were worth far more than healthy ones. How ironic, don't you think? And the rarest of these tulips carried legendary names. Semper Augustus, red and white flames, the most valuable tulip of all. It was said that only 12 bulbs existed in all of Holland. Viceroy, purple and white streaks, fit for a king. Admiral van Enkhuizen, red and yellow, with the grandeur of an admiral. Remember these names, because in a moment, the prices of these bulbs are going to astonish you. In the early 1630s, the tulip trade had been gaining momentum, but it hadn't yet reached the level of madness. Wealthy collectors were buying rare bulbs and cultivating them in their gardens, a normal market. But from 1634 onward, something began to change. First, prices rose. Then they became even more unreachable. And the inevitable end, all control was lost. Demand pouring in from France heated the market to a boil. The French aristocracy had fallen in love with Dutch tulips and wanted them at any price. Prices doubled, tripled, quintupled. The Dutch saw an opportunity. Money could be made not just from the flower itself, but more importantly, from the expectation that prices would keep rising. By 1636, the market had transformed into a fully speculative frenzy. People were no longer buying tulips to plant in their gardens. They were buying to sell at a higher price. But here was the strange part. Most of the bulbs were still in the ground. Tulip bulbs are planted in June, bloom between February and May of the following year, then dug up. So the vast majority of trading was happening over bulbs that hadn't been seen yet, still sitting underground. This was one of the world's first futures markets, but there was no regulation, no guarantee, only hope, greed, and ambition. By the autumn of 1636, a wind of madness was blowing across the Netherlands. It was no longer just wealthy merchants entering the tulip market. Everyone was in. Carpenters, butchers, bakers, farmers, servants, every profession you can imagine was racing to get their hands on tulip bulbs. According to records from the period, people were buying tulips by selling their homes, mortgaging their farmland, pouring in savings accumulated over generations, trading away their merchandise. The coffee houses of Amsterdam and Haarlem had become trading floors. Informal trading groups called collegia were formed. People gathered in the evenings to buy and sell tulip bulbs. Enormous sums of money changed hands, often through nothing more than promissory notes. And prices kept climbing every day, every week, every month. One analyst calculated, between November 1636 and February 1637, within just 3 months, the price of some tulip bulbs increased by a factor of 20. 20 times. Think about it. You buy something for $10,000 today. 3 months later, it's worth $200,000. Is that not a complete break from reality? Now I'm going to give you some numbers. As you read them, don't forget we're talking about a tulip bulb, a few centimeters wide, pulled from the earth, destined to rot away. According to records from early 1637, the following was offered for a single Viceroy tulip bulb: 2 loads of wheat, 4 loads of rye, 4 fat oxen, 8 fat pigs, 12 fat sheep, 2 barrels of wine, 4 barrels of beer, 2 barrels of butter, 450 kilograms of cheese, 1 bed, 1 suit of clothes, 1 silver cup. Total value, 2,500 florins. What did 2,500 florins mean in those days? The average worker earned between 150 and 300 florins a year, so this single bulb was worth 10 to 15 years of a laborer's wages. A beautiful house along the canals of Amsterdam cost around 10,000 florins, meaning 4 bulbs could buy you a house. But it didn't stop there. For Semper Augustus, a price of 6,000 florins was set at the start of 1637. According to some sources, that figure climbed as high as 10,000 florins. A single bulb was worth a mansion on the canal. If that isn't madness, then what is? January 1637. Prices were still rising, but some observers were beginning to grow uneasy. Thinking people were asking, are these tulip bulbs really worth this much? Or are they selling at these prices simply because everyone believes they are? This is the fundamental paradox of speculative bubbles. Value doesn't come from real utility. It comes from the belief that someone else will pay an even higher price. It's called the greater fool theory. Everyone hopes to find a bigger fool than themselves. But one day, the fools run out. February 3rd, 1637. Harlem. The day began with an ordinary auction. A merchant put a batch of tulip bulbs up for sale. Bidding opened at the expected price. But then something happened. Nobody bought. The price was lowered. Still no buyers. Lowered again. Offered for almost nothing. But still not a single person stepped forward to buy. For the first time, prices were falling. The news spread, first as a whisper, then as a shout. A wave of panic swept across the entire Netherlands. Everyone wanted to sell. Nobody wanted to buy. Prices began to collapse. Within a week, the market had completely crashed. Yesterday's 6,000 florin bulb couldn't find a buyer at 600 florins today. And tomorrow, it wouldn't sell for 60 florins either. People were forced to confront a horrifying truth. The papers they held, the notes they had signed, the contracts they had made, everything they had received in exchange amounted to a handful of perishable bulbs. And those tulip bulbs were now worthless. The merchant who sold his house lost his house and was left holding bulbs he couldn't sell. The craftsman who mortgaged his workshop was left with crushing debt and a few dried-up bulbs. The elderly couple who invested their life savings lost everything. Thousands of people across the Netherlands were financially devastated. Some families were buried under debts they would never be able to repay for generations. Courts overflowed with contract disputes. Commercial reputations were destroyed. And the beauty of the tulip was instantly transformed into a cursed symbol. So what did the government do? Dutch authorities faced an impossible situation. If they canceled the contracts, commercial trust would collapse. If they enforced them, thousands of families would go bankrupt. In the end, a compromise was reached. Contracts could be voided by paying a small percentage of the original price. In most cases, that rate was around 3.5%. So a contract worth 1,000 florins was dissolved for just 35 florins. There were losses, but a total economic collapse was prevented. The Dutch economy recovered. The Golden Age continued. But for a long time, the tulip remained a bitter memory for the Dutch. The painters of the era depicted tulips in their vanitas, works as symbols of death and impermanence. The message, no matter how beautiful, everything wilts. And the word Tulip Mania, Tulip Mania, became a phrase still used in Dutch today to describe foolishness and greed. I need to open a parenthesis here. The story of Tulip Mania, as it has been told for centuries, may be somewhat exaggerated. Economic historian Anne Goldgar, in her book Tulip Mania, Money, Honor, and Knowledge in the Dutch Golden Age, makes an important argument. The number of people who actually participated in the mania was not as large as commonly believed. Most transactions took place among wealthy merchants, and the economic impact may not have been as devastating as generations of storytellers have claimed. Real losses were suffered, yes, but the narrative of the madness that sank a nation was likely amplified over time. Why? Because the story was too good, too compelling, and most importantly, it carried a lesson. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of Tulip Mania has less to do with what actually happened and more to do with what people want to believe happened. Nearly 400 years have passed since Tulip Mania. But is the story over? No. 1720, the South Sea Bubble. The English invested wildly in the shares of a trading company. The bubble burst. Even Isaac Newton lost his money, and afterwards said, "I can calculate the movement of stars, but not the madness of men." 1929, the Wall Street crash. Everyone was buying stocks. Everyone was going to get rich. Then Black Tuesday arrived. 2000, the dot-com bubble. Every internet company was valuable. Companies with no profits were worth billions. Then reality caught up. 2008, the mortgage crisis. House prices would rise forever. Everyone should buy a home. Then the market collapsed, and the world faced a financial catastrophe. 2017, the Bitcoin frenzy. 2021, the NFT craze. Meme coins. GameStop shares. The pattern is always the same. Something new and exciting emerges. Early investors make money. The story spreads. The feeling of you're missing out begins. Everyone jumps in. Prices reach irrational levels. Someone asks, is this really worth that much? Panic, collapse, regret. Tulip Mania was not the first, and it will certainly not be the last. Let's try a thought experiment together. Imagine you're holding a tulip bulb, a beautiful bulb, freshly dug from the earth, looking healthy. How much is it worth? A few dollars, you'd probably say. You know you can buy tulip bulbs at a flower shop. They're not exactly expensive. But what if you were in the Netherlands in 1637 and everyone told you this bulb was worth 10,000 florins? And last month it was 5,000. This month it's 10,000. And next month it might be 20,000. And what if you watched your neighbors, your friends, everyone around you making money? What would you do? Most of us would probably head straight to the notary with the deed to our house. And that is the real lesson of Tulip Mania. Madness is visible from the outside, not from within. If we had lived in the Netherlands during that time, most of us would have been among the mad, because humans are social creatures. We follow the herd. We trust the wisdom or the foolishness of the crowd. In the 17th century, it was tulip bulbs. Today, it could be something else. Stocks, cryptocurrencies, NFTs, real estate. Price is what everyone agrees to pay, but value is an entirely different concept. Seeing the difference between the two can sometimes mean the difference between wealth and ruin. And here is where the story ends. We don't know what became of Adrian van Bergen. Perhaps he paid off his debts. Perhaps he never could. Perhaps he rebuilt his life. Perhaps a tulip bulb ruined it forever. But his story, even 400 years later, still tells us something. Before you sell your house for a flower, think twice. Because flowers wilt, bubbles burst, and the sun always rises in the east. From Tulip Mania to today, human greed never changed. Only the flowers did.